Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month in cybersecurity for August of 2020. We look forward to another great session with you discussing events that have occurred in the news that have been newsworthy and we might be able to take away some salient nuggets for us as a small or medium-sized business. If you have any questions, certainly enter them into the Q&A panel. We're just going to get started and kind of get into things. Don't have a ton of stories this month, not that nothing occurred. I thought we'd kind of par down the number of stories just to provide a little focus area on some of the countermeasures that can be taken. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda. Three basic areas we're going to focus on. One is just kind of email compromise as a whole. Yes, this is a bit of a redundant theme, but this is what we're really seeing out there. And I think it's best that you have the latest guidance regarding what's occurred in this particular case to an organization called SANS. And are you really a click away from danger? Mike, put on my clever title hat here for 10 is wanted from the FBI. As you know, they always have the top 10 list of most wanted criminals. And in this case, they're talking more about operating systems and what happens when you can't patch a Windows 7 or 8 device. And last but not least, I picked from lots of choices with regards to who received ransomware this year. I picked a Chicago firm. Not because I guess just because they're localized, but they're a little larger, I think, than most footprints of where your organization may be today. But what's happening with ransomware? How is it morphing? And more importantly, what can you do about it? I want to make sure that we're all on the same page there. Obviously, we've got some miscellaneous stuff at the end too to kind of discuss other things that have occurred in the month of August. All right, without further ado, let's jump into SANS. SANS, you may be familiar as a security-based organization. They comprise a lot of documentation, standards, and things of that nature. So it's particularly ironic, if you will, when they get hit with a security measure. And indeed, what happened to them, I think could happen to any of us. There had been an email campaign out there. It started in late July, actually, and on August 11th, and SANS, by the way, has been very forthright about what occurred to them. They're letting everybody know because they feel it can be educational. So what we're doing here is exactly what they wanted, which was to know exactly what happened so that you can make sure that prevent this from happening in your organization. But on August 11th, one of their employees unknowingly clicked on a email that they thought was relevant for them. And this email caused the following damage to their organization. 513 emails were forwarded out to the attackers. Okay. Not immediately, right, over a course of time, but as they kind of dialed it back, they noticed that they lost control of 513 emails. Doesn't sound that bad. If 500 emails, what could possibly happen? Well, it so happened that the emails they lost contained attachments, which contained 28,000 records of SANS members. So you can imagine if this was your organization, it could be a recipe, it could be customer accounts, things of that nature, sensitive in nature, or worst case, it could be financial transfer information, banking information, things of that nature. In any case, the phishing email looked a lot like this. In fact, it looked very much like this. You'll notice, they grayed out the exact address as to where it came from, but pretty decent email addressing up top. Copy of July bonus, which gives you incentive that this might be something of financial value within your organization. You're incented to take a look at it. And by clicking the open there, you weren't immediately suspect to danger. What that ended up causing you to do is to fill out a Office 365 credentials, which upon doing that, it actually installed an application called Enable for Excel as a background app. It's called a Microsoft Office OAuth, meaning it uses a legacy protocol to authenticate and is installed as part of your Office. So it's like a malicious Office app that you really don't have a lot of control over, and it uses a legacy protocol. Let's hope that you might have the legacy protocols blocked. Let's hope that you have some organizational control over who's installing applications. But in this case, SANS had neither, and therefore this app was installed, and this app would create a mail forwarding rule called anti-spam rule. So it would look pretty innocuous in someone's Outlook, and it would monitor for certain keywords, as you see on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side there. It's looking for any time anyone's using one of those words, and it would forward that email off to the unknown entity or the hackers. So they're only interested in certain emails, right? They got a filtered list of good emails, people mentioning payment plans or wire transfers, and through that, they were obviously able to get some customer accounts. So bad stuff occurred. In this case, they weren't looking at emails. Mails actually got forwarded out. A little different attack than some others that have occurred, but who is this going to happen to? Well, other people within SANS may have seen this email and ignored it. One employee clicked. One employee decided to open up and enter their credentials, and through that, a number of emails were sent out over a period of time. And so I think some things we can take away from this are certainly the ability to know that this happened, right? Detect it, initially protect ourselves, and certainly educate and respond to this. So just kind of looking in, for those that are familiar with NIST cybersecurity framework, there's 5 pillars and so forth, but let's just focus on the middle 3. How do we protect against this? How could we detect that this occurred, and what would we do about it? Protecting, certainly could happen with security awareness plans. If you have a good plan for training your employees for not clicking on these items, let's say, hopefully this slide is now part of your security awareness plan for next month, right? So that everyone's aware of this within your organization, as this is a threat that is continuing still out there in the wild. You certainly could have something like umbrella DNS protection, which we've talked about before, is a way to navigate where are people going on the internet and making sure that they're not going to malicious sites. So this was certainly going to an Office 365 site that was not yours initially, and DNS may have helped in providing that, as well as watched the install of an application down to your workstation. From a detection perspective, we have process place that we've talked about for months called security review for Office 365, where we would have seen unauthorized logins, unauthorized application installations, and would have made you aware of that. We also have a process where we've been going through with a lot of customers and disabling legacy protocols. We'll discuss that more in subsequent slides. And certainly, had this occurred to your organization, and it's worthwhile to turn the tables now, do you have an incident response plan? And secondly, does your incident response plan lay out specific measures as to what you would do in the event of a business email compromise or this particular scenario? And I put the testing component on there because having a plan is great, and having a plan that's tested is way better. So tabletop test with your users, and certainly if you don't want to run this, we've run this for other organizations where we'll walk you through using your incident response plan or ours and ask people what they would do, and we can throw in various scenarios specifically around business email compromise. So let's dive in a little deeper on one area of this, which is detecting this. So as we'll kind of unfold and unpack email compromise a little bit, keep in mind that in some way your inbox is compromised. Now in this case, it was a phishing email and you provided credentials, but in another case, and mail was actually forwarded out. In other cases, they might be doing something called a password replay, which we've talked about in subsequent months, where they're just playing a password that they found out on the internet or they purchased, or they're just doing a dictionary attack, or what's known as a dictionary attack, using common passwords with your credentials. In any case, the inbox can get compromised, and when it does, and it does happen quite often, we see this on a weekly basis with our customers where we're monitoring. That organization, the hacking organization or evildoer, if you will, is going to watch, read, and learn in terms of what's occurring with your mailbox. And in specifics, with the SANS case, remember, they're not interested in all your email, they're interested in the good ones. And so they provided a nice filtered list for you. Okay, at that point, they're going to try to impersonate you. They're going to maybe, in many cases, we see them sending emails on your behalf, trying to continue the conversation. Yes, we have changed our loan payment arrangements, and now you'll have to send your mail to here. Meanwhile, the user that's been compromised doesn't even know this is occurring because all the email rules are deleting the emails that might notify them on the background. And in the end, the goal is to delete all the emails or mess up the inbox to some degree and to cover their tracks so that no one can find this out. So this is kind of what happens, and this happens often with our customers on a weekly basis. So let's focus on the watching, reading, learning, and covering your tracks. How do we know that this occurred? Well, first of all, we're looking for any sort of mailbox logins. If you're a US tenant, why should someone from Nigeria be logging into your tenant? Right? So we should be looking for those. If you have mailbox forwarding rules set up, suddenly the SANS employee had a new rule forwarding things out. Why did that occur? If you've got, we've noticed that RSS feed, which is a particular folder, was being used quite often to kind of hide emails. So after they were sent, they would be forwarded into the RSS folder. We're just simply looking for anything going in the RSS folder. It's probably an indicator of compromise. We're looking for people that are turning off auditing, right? What if you set up a new mailbox and you forget to turn on auditing? Or what if auditing has been turned off? Why is that? It's probably a malicious effort. Could be accidental, but either way, you want a complete set of information. And then admin audit logs need to be monitored also. So all of these are indicators of compromise. And some of the things that we're doing to keep things clean for organizations are disabling legacy protocols, which would have been extremely helpful in this case. We're making sure that audit logs are on and maintained. We're trying to implement and maintain and implement MFA policies, which is built into Office 365. We're disabling remote PowerShell, deleting old user mailboxes, and more. So these are some of the things that we're doing on behalf of our customers as a monitoring service, detection service, and then a response service. We can't stop the breach necessarily with this, but at least we're detecting it and making quick actions with it. So we're doing these daily critical port scans. We're looking for RDP, doing daily notification of many of those indicators of compromise that we discussed. And then annually, we're looking at more like 60 variables with regards to your Office 365 tenant, what's proper and what's improper, and letting people know. And we're all doing this for about $400 a month, depending on the number of mailboxes that are within your account. So just wanted to kind of give you a deep dive on where things are at and kind of take it from an issue through to a solution. By the way, if you want to have a conversation with anyone about this, you can certainly schedule a call with your P&A rep. Reach out to me, and just for having us up meeting, we can get you a $25 gift card. If you want to learn further about some of these services or how they tie in with things like security awareness, we do have an upcoming webinar series on security awareness. But let's move on to story number 2. Okay, story number 2 is around, this is the FBI, if you'll recall. And the FBI has come out pretty strongly to talk about Windows 7 devices. Hopefully this desktop background doesn't look familiar to you, or is a thing of the distant past. But these people have got some a warning for you. They put out a private industry notification last week that basically said the FBI has observed cyber criminals targeting computer network infrastructure with operating systems that are end of life. And they don't put out these private industry notifications very often, but this one was particularly telling. They're very concerned about what they're seeing with regards to the use of previous items. So Eternal Blue has been mentioned, Bluekeep exploits have been mentioned, and basically people are modifying the code for those two vulnerabilities. That's going to allow them to break into Windows 7 and have RDP ports, RDP enablement to a Windows 7 device. So basically, the Windows 7 is such a soft target within your environment. It's kind of irrelevant what you're doing elsewhere, because the Windows 7 soft target means that because you can't patch it or have limited capacity to patch it potentially, that soft target's going to be where people are going to go in and start making, you know, it's irrelevant what your firewall is if we can get in and do RDP unfettered on a Windows 7 device. So they're recommending replacing and abandoning the system with obvious knowledge that some systems can't be updated, right? There's still an application you're leveraging that has to be on Windows 7 or something of that nature. And so it takes us to our next step and goes right to the FBI countermeasures that they recommend. And I kind of put them in the same format just so we understood what they're recommending. So in the protection space, obviously they're talking about, you know, getting a modern antivirus, make sure that it's well managed, it's up to date, it's got notifications to the console, things of that nature. They're also recommending a next-gen firewall that's also managed, patched, understanding of the latest vulnerabilities. It's not just port-based, it understands applications. It would understand things like Eternal Blue attacks, things of that nature. And furthermore, have it on the endpoints also. From a detection perspective, they're saying, hey, why don't you run RDP scans? Well, as we discussed a little while ago, we're doing daily RDP scans for our organizations because, and that's exactly what we're seeing, is when an RDP port pops up and suddenly communications are occurring, it's good that you know about that, right? And that's a service that we're providing. And certainly you can do that on your own, but it's built into our daily process. And then obviously with some of these workstations that need to stick around, where you can, you know, obviously you are going to have to buy the extended servicing updates or the ESUs for Windows 7. We're now moving into year 2 of that. And you can patch it to current with those ESUs. But then furthermore, like the FBI is saying, they'd like you to isolate that box as much as possible. Stick it on its own VLAN, make sure that it has limited access to others, things of that nature. And furthermore, they're also recommending incident response plans and testing for when an incident might occur around that Windows 7 device. So enough on that. I just thought I'd kind of let you know that the FBI is in lockstep with protect, detect, respond countermeasures also as we go in this world. Last but not least, story I'm going to talk about, and I had a number of choices that I could have chosen. This is ransomware. And, you know, in July, we had major notable ransomware for people like Garmin. Had a large outage and paid a handsome ransom, we'll call it, to their providers. This month, there was the Canadian Revenue Agency, which is our equivalent to our the U.S. Unemployment Office. So the entire Canadian Revenue Agency could not pay out money to people that were unemployed in all of Canada because, and this was for 3 or 4 days, due to a ransomware outage. Carnival Cruises suffered, they're the world's largest cruise and travel company, and they suffered an extreme ransomware. So as if coronavirus wasn't detrimental enough to their business, along comes this. So, and as a fit of irony, I'll take an aside just to mention a lot of the ransomware gangs have decided that during coronavirus, they're actually going to take a little bit of a hiatus and give everybody a break, which was kind of funny to hear and read about. And so some ransomware gangs are kind of off the hook right now, and you might see ransomware a little bit on the decline, which is allowing some third-tier players, if you will, to come in and ones with less scruples, if you will, to kind of go out and attack some of these organizations. But I chose this organization. Organization's called R1 RCM. It used to be, formerly was called Accretive Health. It's based out of Chicago. Familiar with it as I had been there in the past. They're a very large firm, $1.2 billion in revenue, 20,000 employees. So not, you know, our typical customer by any means, and certainly not a great example for SMB ransomware, but the SMB ransomwares don't make the news, right? They're occurring just as often, if not more often, at a small or medium business. But this isn't a great example, though, of what can happen at a larger organization that has even more resources. As an organization, they do debt collection for the healthcare industry. They have contracts with 750 different healthcare organizations, and they've got a wealth of information, right? Systems host personal, financial, and medical information on tens of millions of patients. Their goal is to go collect money on behalf of these hospital entities. And they were hit with a ransomware called Defray. Defray has been around since 2017. Many of the healthcare, it seems particularly popular in the healthcare industry. It usually begins with Microsoft Office documents, which have been which are sent via email, and they kind of have some VB script encoded within them. There is another warning about that from the Homeland Security just this past month. And a lot of mail filtering technology would prevent this, but a lot of healthcare organizations don't have that mail filtering. So you'll see that mentioned in our ransomware preparation here, but mail filtering is kind of a basic thing at this point. We're not talking about spam and antivirus. We're talking about 0-day, because the Defray ransomware of today is not like the Defray ransomware of even last week, right? It is morphing all the time. And so if you're using a signature-based spam or antivirus pattern for incoming email, you're really going to miss a lot of things. They're just changing so fast. They're called transformative, and they basically are they're evading common recognition techniques. So a couple interesting attributes on this. One is the timing of this was that it was coordinated directly with them announcing their Q2 financial results. And that's something we find that's prolific. The timing of ransomware is oftentimes on a Friday afternoon, oftentimes before a holiday weekend, oftentimes when an IT staff is known to be out of town, oftentimes before an announcement such as financials, during mergers and acquisitions. It's always the quote unquote worst time, but that's known and planned, okay? It's no accident that these are being done at that time. Secondly, I guess the other kind of interesting attribute here is in addition to ransomware, and ransomware is no longer the end game. One of the transitions that has occurred is with the amount of data that they had on their servers, likely a lot of that data was stolen. Okay, they were then told, they were basically extorted to say, hey, we're going to release this data unless you pay us some money. And then ransomware was occurred. So there's actually 3 crimes that occurred here, right? Theft of the data, extortion to get money out of the data, and last was ransomware to lock up the data. In some way, they're going to get their money. They're going to sell your data. You're going to pay them money so that you get your data back. And then arguably ransomware was the final straw, if you will. So ransomware is simply being weaponized as kind of a last resort to kind of hide tracks, distract, cause chaos within your environment while you're trying to negotiate. And Garmin, as an example, last month did pay their $10 million ransom or something close to that, which was what the hackers had sought. So how do you get through this? I put some things in this same format that we had earlier, and you're going to notice number 1 is backup. But rather than even focusing on these 5 here in this format, in prior months and really for the last year, we have told you specifically what 10 things you need to do to protect from ransomware. We have a ransomware guide that talks about this too, but in crawl, walk, run phase, and we're not going to go into a ton of detail on each of these, I'm just going to list them out. There's 5 things you should be doing in the crawling phase, and if you're not doing them, you should. Okay, next gen firewalls, malware, backup plus offline, which is what we're going to talk about more extensively, and some others. Okay, advanced email protection is a no-brainer nowadays. It's a great security spend, very easy to implement, and highly effective against the #1 way that ransomware is going to come into your environment. Looking at Office 365, there's a lot going on there, especially with legacy authentication. The SAN story was kind of one level of protection, but ransomware is another level of protection you get with that review process. Port scans, making your employees aware of some of these threats, and then internet security and DNS. So I won't drill into all of those measures, but certainly if you have questions about any of those, let's talk. But let's dive in just a little bit stronger on backup, as there's been some changes in the industry as this goes on. One of the other trends we're seeing, and some of you may be familiar with the 3-2-1 guide for a good backup. This has been around for a decade, right? And it's always stated that keep 3 copies of your data, 2 different storage media, and make sure that one copy is stored off-site. Well, guess what? Even the last 10-year adage had to be changed because of ransomware and some of these attacks, okay? One of the first things that, in order for ransomware to be effective, is they need to know that you can't restore your data. So the first place they go to before they grab your production data is they grab your backed up data, okay? They'll find out what source that's on, and they will encrypt that first, or have the scripts ready to encrypt it simultaneous to the production data. So the goal is to delete backup data, or at least encrypt that data, just to make sure that you can't recover. So what this has meant, yeah, and I guess some other elements obviously of a good backup strategy were encrypting that data, testing that data to make sure you can recover, and then isolating that with your backups from Active Directory. So having a member server where your service is installed. But how things have morphed a little bit, in addition, now we're calling this the 3211 guide, right? And the -1 means we're adding on the idea that you should have an air-gapped offline copy. And by offline, that doesn't mean off-site necessarily. Sure, if it's cloud, but cloud connected, you still have the same problem. They're going to encrypt across the cloud. We need something offline, air-gapped. Tape is a methodology. A different cloud is a methodology. USB disconnected drives are a method. There's a number of methods to do it, but the air-gapped is very important so that you do have the ability to recover even in an incident where your backups have been attacked also. So just kind of doing a quick review of that. And do know that we obviously have managed services around this space where we're actually implementing in the very latest industry best solution for backup. We've got a lot of options as to where that data goes, depending on your current storage or whether you want to leverage some cloud. Looking at backups on a daily basis, making sure that they go, redoing jobs if they need it, making sure things are encrypted, doing some of the testing, and making sure that all recoveries are on us. So we'll take on the responsibility for it if you don't want to do in that game, be in that game. So all of that, inclusive of software as well as implementation, and then managing on a monthly basis starts around $700 a month. So those are some deeper dives. Again, we'd also honor the idea of a $25 gift card to have a conversation about that with you, and certainly continue in our series of managed services with security awareness training. Two last notes. One, some really relevant patches came out from Microsoft this month. One is flagged as critical under Internet Explorer. A lot of people say, oh, I don't use Internet Explorer. Well, guess what? Your servers have it on it. A lot of your Windows operating systems generally have Internet Explorer built in. So you're subject to that vulnerability. Ranges from Windows 2008, 12, 16, Windows 10. All of them have the Internet Explorer and have a critical vulnerability. A lot of this is with regards to certificate signing onto files. And then there obviously was an OS patch and vulnerability also. So some big stuff. We have a patching service if you have a need or don't feel like you can stay on top of patching within your environment in a 30-day or less window. Also, as a reminder, legacy authentication to Office 365. While they are extending the date out another year due to coronavirus, they're suggesting heavily that if you have legacy protocols and are not leveraging them for a useful purpose, to disable them. And I think the SANS article and SANS breach would be a good indication of why you should be doing this. We're doing, half a dozen projects with regards to this now. It's not a challenging process unless you have some really old stuff within your environment, but we can root it out by looking at who's logging on to 365 with what protocols. So those were my warning messages. Those are some of the protocols that need disablement to your Office 365. You want to be focused on modern authentication up at the top and not focused on the legacy authentications at the bottom. All right, so if you have a desire to kind of look at the 3 items that are there, we certainly have free trials of any of those items: security review, phishing test, and a vulnerability scan. For qualified customers, we'll also do a Cisco Umbrella trial where we'll give you some DNS protection for 30 days. Happy to do all this for any organization that wants to dabble and see how their organization can be better protected. As mentioned multiple times, our managed services webinar series continues. We have 2 live events that would be continued on September 2nd and 9th, but we have recaps, blogs, and videos available on our website for any of the previous ones if you'd like to take a look at them. So with that, I think we will conclude. Thank you everybody for attending.